Thanks very much, Leanne. As Leanne says, my name's Claire Harvey. I'm one of the Quality Improvement Officers in Glasgow, and my responsibility is digital learning. What we wanted to do tonight, actually, as I say, Donnie's just trying to go on just now, but what we want to do tonight is to give you the big idea about why we're actually doing this digital learning programme in Glasgow, and actually what it actually means to Glasgow and what it means to the pupils and to the parents in Glasgow. And it's the kind of big picture about what's happening worldwide and why it's necessary that we actually do this. So we'll give you the big picture, then we'll talk about what is the connected learning programme, what exactly is going to happen in our schools, who's got what, who's getting what. So we'll do the kind of practical side of it. We're also going to do a bit about reflections on what happened in lockdown, what happened just prior to that, because it came suddenly to everybody. Nobody could have predicted this just a matter of months beforehand or weeks beforehand. So we're going to do a bit about lockdown and what we learned from lockdown. And one of the things that we did learn from lockdown was that parents were really struggling with the technology. Things were maybe coming from the school that they were asked to send back, or things to do with their children or young people, and they really didn't know what to do. So as a result of that, Richard is with us tonight. Richard and some of our digital leaders of learning that you'll hear us referring to throughout this presentation as DLOs. Some of them put together a website over the summertime for parents, and that's been quality assured by some of the parents, and Richard's going to give you more details about that. So I'm thinking maybe once we're waiting for Donnie to come on, Richard, if you want to kind of put the slide up, and I'm happy to start, and as soon as Donnie comes on, Donnie can pick up in this part of it. Okay, thanks, Richard. Okay, right.
See that okay, Claire? Yeah.
That's great, that's smashing. So you just keep flicking it around for me, that's ideal, Richard, thank you. So basically this is about why we're actually doing this. And this slide is actually a presentation that we've put together for schools to deliver to parents so that they can say to the parents in this school, this is why we're actually doing that, because this is what the world looks like. Now, when I looked at this slide again, when we were doing preparing for this presentation, some of this data will be out of date because, for example, it says 90% of jobs across the UK already require the skills to using digital technology. That's probably much higher now because this slide is actually 2 years old. But if you look at the numbers, like nearly 84,500 people work specifically in digital jobs, not just jobs that use digital technology, but actual digital jobs. And the digital sector contributes 4.5 billion to the Scotland's economy. So it's a huge growth economy in Scotland, and that's why it's so important that we ensure the children and young people are prepared for that. And one interesting one is the one about the number of digital businesses in Scotland. It's increased almost twice as fast as across the UK as a whole. So digital is a real growth industry within Scotland, and that's why we need to make sure that our children and young people are prepared for that. So why do we do it in Glasgow? Thanks, Richard. This is some information about the context in Glasgow. And this is one that I've shared with people across the country and across the world at different conferences that I've attended. And it's to put it in the context that 58% of the children in Glasgow live in deciles 1 and 2. So that means it's the poorest areas within Scotland. 22% of our children are looked after, either looked after at home or looked after elsewhere. And of Scotland's asylum seekers and refugee children, 70.1% of them are in Glasgow schools. And 32.5% of Scotland's EL pupils are in our schools, with that 79.7% are like early acquisition stages. And the one at the bottom, about the 35%, are in the poorest areas. And the others are actually about the population. So the tools, when we were deciding what tools we were going to bring in to our schools, what was that solution going to be? We thought we need to have something that actually is the best on the market at the moment. It's something that can meet the needs of children who have English as additional language, but also we have to compensate for all these children who, unless we actually gave them a digital tool in school and taught them the digital skills, they would miss out on this. And it's that digital equity, that's what we thought about. Thanks very much, Richard. So the priorities, the education priorities in Glasgow are that we want is attainment and achievement, enhance the leadership of staff, support families to be able to support their children's learning, and make best use of our resources. So when we were developing our digital strategy, we had to ensure that what we were doing was actually meeting each of these priorities, because these are our citywide education priorities. So these are within our digital strategy. Thanks, Richard. So about 3 years ago just now at the Scottish Learning Festival, the digital learning strategy for Scotland was launched, enhancing learning and teaching through the use of digital technology. And within that document, it specifies exactly what's expected of local authorities, what's expected of schools, and what's expected of teachers. So in Glasgow, what we did was we looked at the expectations for local authorities, and we ensured that our learning strategy matched the expectations. And I think it's fair to say that across the country, Glasgow are seen as the leaders in digital technology in what we're actually doing. And Apple will say to us that we're the biggest project in the whole of Europe. So lots of people are looking at us, and lots of other countries and local authorities have contacted us. But basically 3 years ago, we said we took what's expected of us nationally, and this is exactly what we have done. Thanks, Richard. In our digital learning strategy, we have this diagram which comes from the World Economic Forum. And it's really important to point out that if you look at 1/8 of that segment is actually about digital literacy. So it's about the computational thinking, how you can create online to develop critical thinking. But this programme is not simply about giving children and young people the tools to actually input and output from the technology. It's about them having an understanding about what are their digital rights. It's about their privacy, about their digital footprint, about their intellectual property rights, their identity, how can they use it, about the health part of it and the screen time, how can they use it safely, and it's all about digital security. And I think most importantly, if you look about the digital emotional intelligence, it's about them being aware about the social emotional awareness when you're actually engaging digitally, and to do things digitally in a way that you would do if you were just sitting across from somebody and you were having that conversation, and having empathy with people online. So our schools, when they're developing the digital learning strategy, it's not simply about what are the skills that we have to teach the children and young people, but how are we making them aware of all these other aspects of digital that is so important for them in the world that they live in and grow up in at this moment in time. Thanks, Richard. So in leadership, what we said right at the very beginning, we tried very hard not to call it, it's called the Connected Learning Glasgow project. And we tried very, very hard not to mention the iPads, because for us, the iPad is just the tool that we have chosen to develop these skills with our children and young people. But unfortunately, anytime we've got any press on it, the headlines would be 50,000 iPads going into schools in Glasgow. No matter how many times we tried to focus it back on the learning as opposed to the actual tool. And what we said at the beginning, the success of this programme will depend on the leadership. That's leadership at all levels. That's at the senior leadership within schools and early years centres. Digital leaders of learning in all of our schools. So the teachers being the digital leaders of learning, and pupils leading the learning. So as a result of that, every school and every early years establishment across the city all have at least one digital leader of learning. And as the rollout has progressed, they now have teams of digital leaders of learning within their establishment that are taking forward the digital learning. And the pupils, I would say most of our schools, the secondary schools, they tend to call them digital ambassadors. In the primary school, it's the digital leaders. And these are the children and young people who are not only teaching each other, the digital skills, but are actually teaching the staff in the school the digital skills. And what we said very early on to teachers was, you have to be confident enough to realise when it comes to using this technology, the children are going to take to it much quicker than we are as adults, because it's the world that they're actually living in. So our role is to facilitate their learning and to ensure that the learning, when it's taking place in a safe environment and they understand the safety aspects of it. Right, Richard, thank you. So what are we doing? On the left-hand side, you will see there's a desktop and there's the smart boards. And this is what we've had in our classrooms probably for well over 10 years now. In the primary school, and one of the issues within our schools over the years has been the lack of Wi-Fi. And I always remember right at the very beginning when we were talking to the contractors and they were talking about the different training you could do and about the iPads going in. And what we actually said to them at that point was, if you can improve the Wi-Fi in our schools, that's a big hit for all of our staff and for all of our children and young people, because that's been an issue for such a very long time. So you'll see there from the stats, this is the kind of increase in bandwidth that we're going to get within the schools. And very early on, we actually saw an improvement in that. So the smart boards and the desktops will be replaced by smart boards. Sometimes that will remain, and that will just be where the Apple TV will be projected onto the screen. And rather than the desktops, it will be iPads. So what we're having is from primary 7 and then S1, S6 will be one-to-one iPads, and from primary 1 to primary 5, it will be shared iPads, and then it'll be shared iPads in, from primary 1 to 6, it'll be shared iPads, and then shared iPads in our yearly year centres. But all teachers across the city will have the iPads. Okay. I should probably mention at this point actually that there still will be desktops remaining in secondary schools and a few in primary schools, because for some subjects they still need the desktops. So over the summer holidays there was a desktop refresh in all of our secondary schools. So this is just, oops, excuse me. So for the teacher deployment, this is a wee bit of an update on where we are with the teacher deployment. And this is what we learned during lockdown was we have to increase the deployment to teachers and to pupils, and CGI, our partners, agreed to accelerate that deployment. On the off chance that we get to any stage, as we can see just now, some classes are being sent home to isolate, so we have to make sure we have the technology in place for that. So in March, prior to lockdown, or when we went into lockdown, there was 4,014 iPads were being used by teachers. And our original Connected Learning programme was for completion date for the teacher deployment in May 2021. We then began the remote deployment of iPads to teachers during lockdown, that was in May. And then during July, this continued right through the holiday time. Teachers went in, picked up their iPads, and there was additional 1,847 teachers got their iPads. And as a result of that, when the schools come back in August, almost all teachers have their iPad. And the reason why I'm saying almost all is because obviously we've got supply teachers, we've got probationers that have come into the school. So that has just been completed at this point in time. So what was due to be finished by May 2021 has now been completed, the teacher deployment, and that's because we accelerated things because of the lockdown. Okay, Richard? The pupil deployment. So when we went into lockdown, 17,540 iPads were being used by our pupils. And the original Connected Learning programme was for completion date in November 2021. And a decision was made at the original learning communities 1 to 9. The deployment was actually by learning community. So it was the early years, the primary, the secondary, and any ASL school within that learning community. The deployment took place at the same time. But a decision was made during lockdown that we should change that model, because our main concern was the young people who were getting into S4, S5 and S6 who would have SQA examinations. So we felt it was really important that these young people had the iPads. So we changed the model, and as a result, we started a rollout. As soon as the schools come back, we started to roll out to S6, S4 to S6 in the secondary schools. And by the end of October, all secondary pupils will have a one-to-one iPad. This has been accelerated. And that's why actually somebody had asked the question about why did their child have to use their phone to actually to be able to download some of the apps. And basically what's happening is because there's so much work going on just now, obviously there's blockages, so to speak, but that's just a temporary move just now, and it's just because of the acceleration. Primary pupil deployment begins. That will be the primary 7s, one-to-one iPads. Also the shared iPads, they will be deployed at that point. And the original shared iPads that were delivered to learning communities 1 to 9 were actually configured in such a way that it was named pupils, which wasn't the best configuration. So they're all going to be reconfigured so they'll be able to be used by any pupil in the school, and also to be able to take that home. So by December, the primary pupil deployment will be completed and the early years 1 will begin. So when we think back to original plan was that this would be completed by November 2021, and by December this year, 2020, all of our primary and secondary pupils who have to have their iPads deployed, that will be there, and the early years will begin for completion in March. So this basically is a result of lockdown and us realising we need to get this out. Okay, Richard? Okay. So these were the couple of questions, and it was the connectivity issues just now is simply due to the volume of deployment and the CGI engineers resolving in an individual school basis. They're having to go around and heat map the schools and say, right, where do we have to have more WAPs, what has to go in here. But also because of the churn and because we were trying to move things around quickly, there was some paperwork was missing. So at this moment in time, everybody is working flat out to try and get things moving as quickly as possible. And it's a great partnership at the moment between CGI and the DLOs in our school. They're supporting each other because basically everybody wants to get this right and to get things in place as soon as possible. Okay. Right, lessons learned from lockdown. I think if we put this in a context of where we were just a matter of a few weeks before lockdown, and in the February inset day at the beginning of February, that's when schools look at their school improvement plan, they evaluate the progress from last year's improvement plan, and they think, right, what are we going to take forward in 2021? And over the last 3 years, we've asked schools to have digital learning on your school improvement plan, not as a standalone, but for example, if you were talking about something, say for example, raising attainment in literacy, well, how are you going to use the digital tools to support that raising attainment? So in the February inset day, every school across the city will have been talking about digital learning and what they're going to take forward in 2021. At that point, there was some teachers that were even unsure of the need for the iPads and the impact. They've been teaching for a number of years. This is asking them to teach in a totally different way, giving them totally different tools. So we still had people that were not really very sure about this. Well, okay, it's going to be next year before I get it. So we asked schools to actually develop plans for teacher professional learning. There's the teachers who are starting right at the very beginning, and there are those who are way ahead. So they had to look at their own professional learning, and for teachers to reflect on that and at their review. There was also parents that were unsure of the need of technology. I remember one of the first press articles during the lockdown. The press did an article on, isn't it wonderful that Glasgow have been so forward thinking with this technology and getting the iPads out and what a difference it's actually doing. And Maureen actually commented on the time, so these were the very same people a year ago were saying, well, why are you bothering to do this? But what came out of lockdown was schools are saying to us now, the priorities that they had actually put on for 2021, many of those priorities have already achieved, because during lockdown, everybody became very conscious of the need for technology, and teachers who before thought, well, I'm not very sure how this is going to work, realised that actually I need to get my head around this so that I can be part of what's actually happening. Okay, Richard. Okay. So what did we do? Probably about the beginning of March, I think that's when we all looked and we saw what was happening in Italy and we saw what was happening in Spain, and all of a sudden it became very close. This is something that's going to happen to us. So the Digital Learning Strategy Group, we thought about, right, how are we going to support schools during lockdown, no matter where they are in that digital journey. And Richard and a group of others, we basically sat round a table in the days where we were allowed to sit round a table without 2 meters between us, and they put together a remote learning site for teachers. So for example, if you were going to be using Teams or using Showbay or Seesaw or Glow or Google Classroom, how would you actually do that? So there was a selection of how-to videos and how-to guidance notes. And these were made by, what we did was we just pulled them all together, but these were made by DLLs across the city who would contact us and say, I've made this, do you want me to share it? This is for my pupils, this is for my teachers. So we pulled all that together and we made the remote learning site. At the beginning, before the schools locked down, there was all the discussion from SQA where the qualifications going to take place. So what the decision was made that any iPads that had actually been built and were ready for distribution should go to S4 to S6 pupils in order of the schools that were used to getting them. So we worked really closely with the schools and the CGI, and we got more iPads out. Now, at that point, parents were getting fearful because they could see what's happening. Are the schools going to close? Are they not going to close? Some pupils weren't coming to school. And there was actually occasions where some of the secondary schools, teachers were dropping iPads off at schools for their senior pupils so that if the exams were going ahead, they were prepared for this. So it was very much a scurry of everybody coming together to see, right, how can we actually support each other? And this whole ethos of supporting each other continued throughout the lockdown. And right at the very beginning, from the day that the schools closed on the Monday, there was like, my inbox was just a flurry of emails from teachers saying, where can we get this? How can I do that? Who'll do this? And I actually described myself as a kind of postie at the time, whereby I was actually pointing people in the direction of those who had already done it. And this is when we decided this would be an idea that we could actually deliver Teams webinars for teachers. And it was actually teachers talking to other teachers about what they were doing in their school. And when I think back on it, before we went into lockdown, very few people had ever used Teams. And all of a sudden, this was becoming the medium that we were using. So in the first diagram here, you will see that during lockdown, we had 1,364 members in our council webinars team. And the first one that we launched was actually giving them an overview of what was coming next. And I always remember at that one, you go onto the teams and you're never quite sure how many people are going to go on. And we realized it was 250 was the maximum, and we saw more and more people trying to get on. So at that point, we decided anything we do, we had to record it. So through those 7 weeks, we had 7 Apple Teacher Mondays. We then had coffee break webinars at 10:30 on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And I was inundated with emails from teachers saying, I'd love to tune into the coffee break webinars, but I've got 2 wee ones at home that I need to look after. I can only do things at night time. So we recorded those also. And as a result, it was 2,022 people who actually registered for the webinars, 249 subscribed to the webinars on YouTube, and these recorded videos were watched by 5,095 teachers, and that's how we were followed from there. So as a result, we had to rethink what we were going to do this year. And as you'll see, the next one, on Tuesday, we had the launch of our Digital Professional Learning for this session. And likewise, it's the same model as we had before. Next week, we're going to have the Apple Teachers on a Monday. And rather than the coffee break webinars, because they're after school events, we're calling them creative classrooms. And again, what we're having is DLLs talking about what they're doing in the classroom. So back to what I said at the beginning, the success of this programme depends on the teachers and the pupils within the school. So this is teachers teaching other teachers, showing other teachers what they're actually doing. So that's the beyond lockdown. Also, I was inundated with requests from people to say what the best tools for us to use to engage with pupils. So during that time, at the very beginning, one of the tools that was used in early years in primary was Seesaw. So for example, in January, there was 301 teachers and early years practitioners that had signed up for that. And by June, there was 1,342. And this is a diagram that I got from Shobi, which is one of our partners. Shobi is an app that we use for engagement with children and young people and with parents. So for example, in January, we had 6,000, I'm just trying to see the screen here just now, with 667 teachers in January. That rose to just over 1,000 in February. And you'll see in March, there was an additional 4,840 teachers signed up for Shobi. And every month, there was more and more teachers signed up for that. And what we're finding now is when we come back, that's more and more schools are coming on board with either Shobi, Seesaw, Teams, and the other platforms that are used. And this was teachers who were desperate to get something in place with their pupils. Okay, Richard? So what did we learn? The big questions during lockdown were schools were pleading for, I've got families that don't have any Wi-Fi, families don't have any IT, what can I get out there? And it wasn't as simple as, yeah, we'll just buy lots of iPads and get them out. These have to be built in such a way that they're managed so that when they're used at home, they're as safe, the same firewalls are in place as they are in school. And there was the Wi-Fi thing. So to address that, Glasgow City Council have got a grant from the Scottish Government, the Digital Equity Grant. And at the moment, there's a questionnaire going out to schools are surveying their families just now and asking them if you have technology at home or not, or if you don't have Wi-Fi at home to contact them. And this is what the Digital Equity Grant will be used for. The other big thing was parents were unsure of the different platforms used for engagement because there was so many different ones. And that's why we met with Leanne just near the end of June to say, right, well, how could we support parents? And that's why Richard and a group of DLOs over the summertime got together and put together the parents' website. So at this point, I'm going to pass over to you, Richard. Okay.
Claire,
can I come in? There's a question. Do you want to take the question now?
Yes, that's fine. That's okay. Yep.
Okay. So there's one question on the chat, and the question is, what's the plan for the revamp or rollout of the next generation wireless network solution for Glasgow schools? And who has the contract to revamp and roll out the wireless network solution for the schools?
See, actually, this programme is called the Connected Learning Programme, right? And what part of that contract was to upgrade all the wireless network across the whole estate. So basically, the iPads do not go into the schools until the Wi-Fi has been updated. And the Wi-Fi and the infrastructure, that was all done kind of like 6 months before any iPads went forward. So that is part of the programme as well. It's not just the iPads, it's the infrastructure, and CGI are the ones that are actually doing the infrastructure of it. Is that okay?
Okay. There's a second question has just come on.
Okay.
It's a question from Tracy at St Paul's, I think that is. Why are some schools using multiple platforms?
Right. Basically, there are multiple platforms available, as in Teams, as in Shobi, Google, Glow, etc. When we went into lockdown, we weren't at a point whereby teachers were using different platforms within the school, but we weren't at a point whereby they were using a lot to communicate back and forward with parents and with pupils at home. So there were different platforms available, and at that point it was up to schools to actually choose. But what we discovered was, when we did a survey during lockdown, The most successful engagement came when a school used one platform. And that's what schools are now looking at just now, to get one platform in place for the school. Some primary schools maybe used Seesaw, primary 1 to 5, because it was easier for them to use. Whereas primary 6s and 7s would use Shobi because they were more able to do that up the school, and it also prepared them when they went into the secondary school, because the secondary schools were using Shobi, whereby the early years were using Seesaw. So you would get a child's profile from early years that could be passed on to the primary if they were using the Seesaw, and likewise the Shobi at the other end. But I think if we put all this in the context of when I was explaining those few weeks, when a few weeks beforehand, we didn't realise what was going to be happening, but we were just trying to meet everybody's needs. But schools just now are reflecting on what happened and what can they do to ensure it's best for the pupils and best for the parents to engage as we move forward. So they're at that reflective process at the moment as well. Okay.
Thanks, Claire. There's no more questions.
Yep. If that was St Paul's Secondary School, I think I get an email to say that their pupil deployment was just being completed. So, okie doke. I'll hand over to you now, Richard.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yep, thanks.
Working in Glasgow, I totally understand the importance of the partnerships, and when Leanne approached us with Catherine to create something for parents, for guides to support those different platforms that schools are using that Tracy mentioned there, I kind of knew what the difficulties were, because I've got my own children in school. So it was really, really good feedback about what we needed and what was certainly missing. So myself and Claire and 6 other primary and secondary school teachers got together, and we had a basically initial conversation about what we could do to provide that, really to do with lockdown as well, and people not being able to access school and pieces of paper and whatnot. So we came up with something called Wakelet. And Wakelet, actually somebody described it to me the other day there, it's basically like Pinterest for teachers. So anyone who's used Pinterest, you know that way it's just sort of images everywhere. And basically Wakelet allows you to connect anything into it. It can be images, it can be audio files, it can be PDFs, it can be Word documents, similar to the way you would upload things on Facebook or Twitter. Twitter's even limited, but Wakelet allows us to link anything in. So we created the Glasgow City Parents Group Wakelet. And within it, we put the documents that we've been talking about because of the platforms that schools use. Glow is accessible to all pupils within Glasgow because they have a Glow username, and so do teachers. So that's a Scottish Government funded project, and it's them who control Glow, and they provide those passwords, as I say. So there's a guide to Glow, and then there's Teams, because we realise that is a commonly used platform within the secondary schools for accessing work, usually called assignments, and some of the secondary schools use that. Seesaw, as Claire had mentioned, is used in the kind of lower end of the infants and early years because it's a bit of an easier interface for parents to use. And then we've got Shobi, which is similar to Seesaw but a bit more technical, and it has additional features. And then we have Google Classrooms. The reason we created them and we went to the DLOs is because the DLOs who created them, the members of staff within Glasgow City Council, have the knowledge of that platform. They are sector leaders. They are the people who led the webinars during lockdown to show other staff how to do these things. They know what they're talking about. And why, Tracy asked a really important question there, why did some schools use different platforms? Sometimes it's just to do with the skill of the individual within that school. And lockdown showed us that some people had skills and some people didn't, and that's why there is differences. Particularly in my school, I'm a Google school, and we use Google and we love Google, but we realise it has kind of limitations. So we're looking at Seesaw for our infants at the moment because we recognise how that will really engage our early years, and also our infants and also our families and infants. So we created these guides. Leanne and Tracy and Catherine gave us excellent feedback about the guides themselves, that they didn't have big enough font, and sometimes the videos didn't work and that wasn't the right colour. So we listened to all the feedback. We had a meeting kind of after the initial meeting, and we changed things. We fed back to the DLOs and they all kind of updated things. All the guides have facilities to look at them. They're books, they're kind of online books, and also you can change the languages again. And that was one of the things that Leanne and Tracy had fed back to us. What about our EAL parents? How do we support them? One of the unfortunate things about the platform that we use to create the books, which is called Book Creator, and I'll show you all this in about 30 seconds, is that the text can be quite small sometimes. And you can zoom in using your own browser the same way you would in Google or Internet Explorer, but it's not perfect. So we created PDFs, which are just kind of paper format, electronic paper format, so you can zoom them up as big as you want to if you've got children who are visually impaired, or also parents who are visually impaired. So PDF gives us that flexibility that we can just use the magnifying glass to make them as big as possible. So I'm just going to quickly stop sharing this page and then just click on to the next one. So just bear with me. I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to share the next one, which is this one, and hopefully that will pop up. Can you see that okay? Yeah?
Yep, yep.
Fantastic. I don't know why it's going all dark in my room, by the way. It's like all the lights have switched off. Don't know what's happened there. It's not a very user-friendly web address, but I know Leanne is going to share that out on the different communication platforms that she spoke about earlier on. But basically this is a Wakelet, and as you can see, we've got all these guides that clip on, that basically you just add them, you just click on them and they sit there. So I'm going to show you the Google Classroom one because that's the one that I made, and I'm going to be dead honest here. I think that's the best one. That's a joke. They're all really, really good by our DLOs, but I know this one because that's what I use in my establishment. So I'm just going to click on it. And what it does is it takes you to this book. So you click on the icon within Wakelet and then you get to this book. And as I said, if I can just move that out of the way, you've got the feature here which you can get the book read to you, which is a really, really good feature. And you've got the kind of settings feature there, and you click down on the settings feature, and then you can, as you can see here, the little voice that would read to me would be Daniel, and he's English and he's from Great Britain, but you can change it. It doesn't have every language, but it does have some of the most commonly spoke one. When Claire spoke about the languages and the EL and the amount of EL learners that we have in EL families, we know that down here we have Romanian, we know that it has Arabic, and we know at the top, I believe, if I want to find it, Turkish is there, Hebrew, Hindi, Thai. So you've got all different languages there. Not all of them, but some of them are there, and that's really, really useful. To go through the book, you just use this feature and then you click it. We've hyperlinked these because there's different ways to get into Glow and Google. Sometimes you go in via the actual Glow aspect, but sometimes you can get into Google Classrooms via the app. Where possible, we've tried to embed videos. I'm not going to play the video at the moment, but that's just basically the book in a video format. It's the exact same steps with somebody recorded speaking through it. So a bit like anybody who's ever been on YouTube and watched a video of how to, what was I looking at the other day there, how to make good pancakes because it's my wee girl's birthday. You just watch the video and it kind of shows you how to do that. And as I say, we've got text, we've got images, and we've tried to make it as clear as possible. As I said earlier on, the text isn't the biggest in Book Creator, and that was really good feedback that Leanne gave us. So that's why we've made the PDF versions, because they can go really big. So that's how the book looks. If I just go back to the Wakelet, if I show you a PDF version of that as well, here's the Google Classroom one. Here is the version of the PDF version. So it's just the same book, but if I scroll down, just the exact same thing. The video doesn't work because it doesn't work that way. There's no videos, but you can watch the video within the book itself, and you can make the screen bigger the exact same way you can if you're using your own mobile device. It's got that little square box. You can just click that. But as I said, it's got that setting there, which is, I mean, if I need to make it really, really big. We understand the importance of these and how parents do want support. The example you used earlier on of the pupil going home in Drumchapel and having a new laptop and not really knowing what to do with it. These guides hopefully kind of help, not that specific case, but the types of things that parents are phoning schools about at the moment. I know from my own experience, we're using Glow and we're using Google Classroom, and people are phoning us to say, I don't know how to log on, and we've pointed them in the direction of this because we were trialling it with those families, and also they're saying that's excellent and we're just helping people with it. So I know I spoke a lot there, so we took the feedback from Leanne and Tracy from the Glasgow City Parents. We created the books and the videos and the PDFs, and I think the DWALs who played a massive role in this were really, really reactive. We were dead solution orientated, and we really tried to make these as accessible as possible for as many families as possible, as Claire spoke about those stats and that data at the start. So I think that's me finished, Claire, so I'm just going to stop sharing.
Okay. That's great. Just go back onto the...
Yep, I'll just go back in.
Back into the thing. Right.
Back to this, and I'll go to the next slide.
That's great. And to be honest, actually, the last few slides that I've actually got are just actually pictures to show you why we're actually doing this. What's the potential of actually giving the pupil an iPad in your hand. We want them to become curious, to actually ask questions. Want to flick through these quickly, Richard?
Yep.
To actually have a sense of wonder. Curious, asking questions, wonder at it, and that whole creativity. Throughout lockdown, we did with them the Create Team 30 days of creativity, and it was just small snippets of things that children and young people could do to be creative. We want to, because these are the kind of skills that our children and young people need in the 21st century. This is a skill set. So next one, Richard. So basically, we've just put them all together: wonder, curiosity, and creativity. That's what we want our children and young people to be like. And the last slide is our finale, which is Glasgow is the best place to learn and teach. And this is a slide that I've used right from the very beginning, because when CGI came to present to us about the Connected Learning Programme and what could bring to it, they said, and we can make Glasgow the best place to learn and teach, to which we said, Glasgow is already the best place to learn and teach, but this time they'll be the best place to learn and teach using digital technology. So